Witam Państwa. I'd also like to join William in thanking Małgorzata, Ilana, and Agnieszka and Anna for organizing this event and for making us feel so welcome. I'm going to try to introduce the book to you. Apologies in advance for my sound. I'm a bit under the weather, so if I cough, I'm very sorry. Now, on its face, our book has one clear objective, and that is to understand how one historical event, Katyn, has been remembered in the geopolitical and geocultural, let's say, corridor of the Baltic states, Belarus, Ukraine, Poland to the west, and Russia to the east. But this objective is complicated by a paradox. It's a paradox known to most Poles, but it's one that we felt we had to confront and explore in the book at great length. And the paradox is this: the majority of the victims of those who perished in what has become known to the world as Katyn, in fact died far from the forest in Western Russia that gives the tragedy its name. These victims were killed not only in the Katyn forest, but also in Kalinin, today's Tver, in the center of Kharkiv in eastern Ukraine, and in secret NKVD prisons in Belarus and Ukraine. And their remains today lie in mass graves throughout Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. They lie alongside Ukrainians, Russians, and Belarusian artists, civic figures, students, alongside Jews, Catholics, and Orthodox. All of these victims were, of course, executed by the Stalinist regime. Now, these killing fields are, to varying degrees, both known and unknown, remembered and forgotten. All of them point to a divergence or a discordance between the memory of Katyn and the history of Katyn, between what has been recorded with respect to the tragedy and what has been recalled. This discordance provoked us to write the book, and essentially the book is a journey through the interconnected memory cultures of Belarus, Ukraine, Poland, Russia, and the Baltic states. This discordance, as my colleagues I know would agree, has had serious implications both for scholarly research and for collective memory in Europe. For decades, Katyn has been presented in scholarship primarily as a Polish national tragedy, and rightly so, understandably so. But it's more than that. It's a tragedy that has literally and physically touched the entire region, from the forests of Bykivnia outside of Kyiv, to very likely the forests of Kuropaty outside of Minsk. So Katyn is a transnational tragedy in the fullest extent of the term transnational. It's a Polish national tragedy that occurred on Russian, Ukrainian, and Belarusian soil that itself was the site of Stalinist atrocities and Russian and Ukrainian and Belarusian national tragedies. The legacy of Katyn, moreover, is not simply physical or material. As you all know, it's highly symbolic. Katyn has become a searing emblem, perhaps the most searing emblem of Stalinist violence and brutality. And as such, it has become a central referential touchstone, a descriptive shorthand for other lesser-known tragedies in the region. For instance, there is Vinnytsia, which since 1949 has been known in Ukrainian emigre circles as the Katyn of Ukraine, where in 1937 and 1938, Stalin's NKVD executed 9,000 Ukrainian and other Soviet citizens and built a park of culture and rest over their remains to conceal the crime. There is also Kaushenu and Ablinga, which have been referred to recently as the Lithuanian Katyns, where Nazis executed 2,000 Jews and other civilians during World War II. No one of us could have traced and mapped, as it were, the symbolic and physical legacy of Katyn. No one of us could have traced its influence in poetry in the Ukrainian language, in political rhetoric in the Estonian language, in films and novels in the Belarusian language. A project like this required, and in our view requires, a true team effort, one in which scholars from various disciplines apply their different linguistic competencies, their different disciplinary backgrounds to one task and attempt to write one narrative with a coherent conceptual frame. In our book, this conceptual frame rests on two relatively straightforward ideas. William has mentioned one of them. I'll try to elaborate both. The first relates to how Katin operates in memory discourse in the region. That is, to how it is remembered and spoken about as a thing of the past with significance for the present. Here we make use of the distinction between metaphor and metonym. So to give you some examples, in Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic states, for instance, particularly in public discourse in these countries, Katin often resonates metaphorically. That is, it is meant to be interchangeable or kind of substitute for places like and tragedies like Vinnytsia, Kausheno, Kuropate, etc. And thereby it is meant to be descriptive of them. But here in Poland, by contrast, Katin often resounds metonymically. That is, it is meant to stand for Poland somehow. It is meant to unite Polish citizens and remind them that they are part of a larger whole. So for instance, in 2010, Donald Tusk remarked in this way that, quote, "We Poles are one big Katin family." Interestingly, Katin as a metonym is active in Russia as well. In 2010, Sergei Karaganov, who is an expert in international relations and a member of the Russian Presidential Council for the Development of Civil Society and Human Rights, remarked that Russia, quote, was one big Katin. The second idea refers less to how Katin operates in memory discourse and more to why it has been such a pivotal, fluid, and dynamic object of public memory, particularly since the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Here we argue, as William suggested, that Katin has been subject to a dramatic and extraordinary series of what we call memory events. These are explosive moments that, in effect, repurpose the past for a new life in the future. So the 2007 premiere of Vaida's film, the 2010 crash of Lech Kaczynski's aircraft, the 2012 United States archival disclosures, all of these events have served to invigorate and change in ways big and small how Katin is remembered not only in Poland, but across Eastern Europe and indeed around the world. Our book offers a number of cases in which Katin as a memory phenomenon has been changed and manipulated and invigorated by various memory events. I want to offer you just two examples from the case of Ukraine. Ukraine, in this book, I think, places in very clear focus a lot of the concerns and issues that we were concerned about. Among them, this divergence between history and memory with respect to Katin, the Katin metaphor, the Katin metonym, as well as the influence of memory events. Now, all of you are certainly aware that one of the major mass graves connected to the Katin operation is located outside of Kharkiv in a village called Piatychatki, where 3,794 Polish victims lie alongside unknown thousands of Ukrainian and other Soviet victims of Stalinist terror. There were decades of speculation about the precise location of this site. And it was officially revealed in a press report produced by the KGB in 1990. The story was eventually picked up by the Russian media, and in particular in the newspaper Moskovskaya Novosti, which is obviously very prominent and very popular. In his article, the journalist Gennady Zhaboronko interviews a local Kharkiv KGB apparatchik, who in response to this discovery and this announcement of the Piatychatki mass grave, shrugs his shoulders, this is what Zhaboronko tells us, shrugs his shoulders and says, "Нет документов." There are no documents. Now, of course, this apparatchik was completely wrong, because one of the most striking archival discoveries in recent years occurred in 2009, when the Ukrainian Security Service offered and publicized a letter written in 1969 by the Ukrainian KGB chief Vitaly Nikitchenko and addressed it to the Soviet KGB chief Yuri Andropov. And in this letter, Nikitchenko reveals that children in the forest have discovered this mass grave, and also says remarkably, that he is not sure who is buried there. He knows that there are Polish victims from the Katyn operation buried there, but he's not sure if or whether Soviet citizens are buried there as well. He has no documentation to refer to, so instead he refers and finds a pensioner named Golitsyn who tells him more about this event in which bodies were taken to the Piaty mass grave. This example shows us that the institutional memory of the perpetrator is not always this seamless repository of the past, but is often much more a closed system of disciplined forgetting. Even for the KGB in this case, uncovering the truth of who is buried in this mass grave, why they were buried there, when they were buried there, is not simply a matter of retrieving documents. It is also about discovering who still remembers when the institution is supposed to forget. By the way, Andropov's response to Nikitchenko's letter is equally shocking. He recommends that the mass grave be eliminated essentially by way of corrosive chemical agents. And indeed, it was discovered by Polish forensic scientists led by Andrzej Kola that there was mechanical drilling that reached the bottom of these graves sometime in the 1970s and 1980s. Strangely, they didn't have an effect on the remains of the victims or the articles of clothing, diaries, and the like that were taken from the site. But nonetheless, it's a rather shocking example of the lengths to which the Soviet regime would go to eliminate and wipe out the memory of Katyn from society. Now, while Nikitchenko and Andropov are writing back and forth with one another about what to do with respect to this site outside of Kharkiv, there is a poet and philologist named Sviatoslav Karavansky who is fighting to defend the memory of Katyn and to assert Soviet guilt from, of all places, a cell in Moscow's infamous Vladimir prison. In 1969, in the spring, prison guards discovered a small corpus of texts, among them 2 documents written in acid, salicylic acid. They were coded, written to the Red Cross and to the United Nations, written from the perspective of Russian inmates in Vladimir who had been sentenced to 25 years in solitary confinement for indirectly witnessing the Katyn massacres. One was this mysterious individual named Andreev. The other was Boris Menshagin, who was the former mayor of Smolensk during the Nazi occupation. Karavansky has some exposure to these people and seeks to make this knowledge that they had, that Katyn was the responsibility of the NKVD, known to the world. His wife was meant to circulate these documents in Samizdat. This did not happen because the documents were discovered. But the discovery of these documents initiates and starts a very unusual set of disciplinary proceedings. First, Karavansky is not leveled with any specified charges. So there are rumors that they have something to do with Katyn, but no one is sure. And secondly, he's not tried in a municipal court, but he's tried within the walls of the prison itself. Now, because of the unusual nature of these things, dissidents within the Soviet Union start to talk more and more about Karavansky and the influence and the importance of his incarceration. And so, by way of Karavansky, the word Katyn is introduced to the seminal record of dissident activities in the Soviet Union, the Chronicle Tekushit Sabiti, Chronicle of Current Events. Karavansky is found guilty. He's sentenced to another 8 years in Vladimir prison. After his sentencing, he writes a letter to the Soviet Prokuratura asking for the prosecutor's office to indict the presiding judges in his case for concealing crimes against humanity. And I want to quote Karavansky directly here. The actions of the Vladimir District Court cannot be qualified as anything other than the concealment of crimes against humanity, a concealment that now enables those who spilled the blood of Poles to present themselves as friends of the Polish people. Now, as we all know, the act of remembering Katyn is a very dark enterprise. But the case of figures like Karavansky, a case that Jerzy Wojek said had special moral importance, the case of a Ukrainian who was fighting to remember the massacre of Poles witnessed by forgotten Russian prisoners, shows us something else. It illuminates another scene, and that is one of transnational solidarity in arduous times and against great odds. So I will leave it there and pass over to my colleague Simon Lewis for more.